Good morning, everybody, and welcome to TLC Live as every Wednesday. And good morning, Orlando. It's a pleasure to have you back in the show, even in your
It's good to
Montana.
be back. It's great to be back. We got every corner of the country covered: Washington, D.C., Montana, Houston, Texas. Looking forward to the program.
Yeah, so we have a special show today, and we have a special guest, and it's like a follow up from the past two shows that we were having the last Wednesday, that we were interviewing, and we're having as a guest two journalists, brave journalists, as it was Avery Hacker and also April Moss, that they went on the air and they said that they were tired about the corporate that they were working for, and we have them here in the show last week, and also that's why it's the show today. It's a follow up about ethic in journalism.
Yeah, so we've done the last couple of shows talking about the unfair nature of the modern media, what we call the mainstream media, and how they suppress journalists' point of view who are out on the streets. In other words, journalists are given assignments to go interview someone or cover a story, and they gather the facts and then they produce their story. But because they're in the corporate world of, either Disney or NBC or, CBS or CNN or Fox News, from a corporate perspective, they may not like the reporting that the reporter, the journalist, is doing. So they edit a lot of the information, and what we get is sort of the woke news, the information that they want to share out across the country, and basically the narrative. And so what we wanted to do today is to educate our viewers about the difference between the corporate world, sort of the mainstream media that really doesn't give you both sides of the story. But we also want to let you know that there are true journalists out there that are covering uh, every aspect of the story and presenting you the facts, whether you like them or not, whether they like them or not. The point is they're presenting the fact. So those will be our two guests today. But I know that you have a couple of folks in studio that you want to introduce.
Yes, we have Carmen Maria Montiel. She is a journalist, a friend of us also, and a future candidate for Congress.
Yes.
Nice.
This is
That's
the first
great.
time that you announced that. This is a,
No, many people knows. We're working on it because the
but maybe
lines.
live.
Yeah, live is the first time. It's gonna be for next year, but all the lines are changing, so we're all kind of like don't know what's gonna happen, but definitely we are in the works, and it's going to happen. We're just waiting for those new lines.
Great. And also
Nice.
we have Bobby Eberle. He is a Republican strategist and host of the 13 Minutes News Hour. And also you've been in many, many shows, as a Republican strategist. So
Right.
welcome and thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for being here in the studio and for your time.
Yeah, looking forward to it. This is going to be great. It's
But,
fun.
but before we start with our guest here in the studio, Orlando, you want to introduce a special guest from Washington.
Yeah, I want to introduce our special guest. We're really honored to have him. He's in the thick of it up in Washington D.C., and his name is Mark Tapscott. And Mark is an award-winning veteran investigative journalist who covers Congress for the Epoch Times, and he is the founding editor of HillFaith, a website of Christian apologetics ministry devoted to sharing the good news of the gospel of Jesus Christ with congressional aides in the nation's capital. Mark was admitted to the National Freedom of Information Act Hall of Fame class of 2006, and he was named the Conservative Journalist of the Year in 2008 by CPAC. He was a consulting editor on the Colorado Springs Gazette Pulitzer Prize winning series Other Than Honorable in 2014. He recently received the 2021 recipient of the National Right to Work Foundation's Lewis and Annabelle Fetterman Right to Work Communication Award. Boy, that was a mouthful. Beginning in 1985, with the Washington Times, Mark has been a reporter and editor with the Journal newspaper, the Washington Examiner, the Daily Caller, LifeZet, and since 2019, he's been with the Epoch Times. Prior to his journalism career, Mark worked for President Ronald Reagan as communications director at the Republican National Committee and as assistant director of public affairs at the U.S. Office of Personnel and Management. He was communications director for Senator Orrin Hatch, a Republican out of Utah, and chief of staff for Representative Jim Collins, a fellow Texan, also a Republican, and a press secretary for Representative Robert Bauman, Republican out of Maryland. Prior to joining the Reagan-Bush campaign in 1980, that's what he did. His first job in the nation's capital was assistant editor of the Conservative Digest magazine in 1976. Boy, that was a long time ago, Mark, and we are absolutely just delighted to have you. Welcome.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. And thanks for reminding me that I've been here since Gerald Ford was in the White House.
Nice.
Yeah. Well, look, thank you for taking the time. As you know, Mark, the last couple of weeks we have highlighted a couple of journalists that have sort of been had their hands slapped for some of their journalism. And they became very frustrated, and they went public with that frustration. And we were commenting the other day, and just this morning I saw on social media and on some of the online publications, there was a little article about how the Trumps would eat their breakfast at Mar-a-Lago behind a rope like animals in the zoo. That's how they described them. Recently, one of the Vogue magazine or one of those beauty or modern day magazines highlighted the First Lady, but they rarely ever mentioned, Donald Trump and his beautiful wife. And so, whether it's reporting or whether it's just social, the conservatives always get short shrift. Is that something you've noticed, Mark? And why is that culture so pervasive in journalism today?
Well, it is indeed the case, and it has been that way for as long as I can remember, though I have to say in the last, 10 years, it's really intensified and become much more overt rather than covert, which is what it was beforehand. I think the main reason why journalism tends to be very much to the left these days, and trust me, over the years, I've interviewed hundreds of young aspiring journalists. And, I hear the same things from so many of them over and over again. Is the typical campus in America, particularly the Ivy League schools, are overwhelmingly dominated by liberal professors. And if all you hear during your 4 years in college is liberal analysis, liberal assumptions, liberal opinions, then the odds are pretty good you're going to come out thinking like a liberal. And that's unfortunately especially the case with journalists.
Well, I'm going to pose a question to you and
Sure.
and sort of get your opinion. But as you say, journalism has changed drastically, and the left-leaning side of journalism is now overt rather than covert. And I wholeheartedly agree. I don't know if you know, but I've been in Texas politics for about 25 years. And when I got started in 1992, you knew they were left-leaning, but at least they made an attempt to be fair and to
Right.
present, both sides and the facts. But here's one
Right.
observation, Mark, that it's a personal observation. But I think the explosion of social media has exacerbated this situation. And the reason is that anyone with a cell phone is essentially a reporter now. For example, if there is a fire in your neighborhood, you can go out and instantly live on social media platforms show the world a video of the house fire. It would take a television crew probably an hour to show up, late to the scene. And so what I think is happening is that everybody with a cell phone, particularly the liberals, they're pretty darn good at it. They're out spreading the message, right? And it's not fact-based, but it puts a huge challenge on mainstream media to compete with all of the new social media journalists. Do you see that as a forced plan upon journalism today?
Oh, absolutely, Orlando. That is a great perception, and it's one that I've observed literally for years. You know, I recall back in the early 2000s when blogs first became popularly read, and they were succeeded by social media, Twitter, and so forth. Back when the blogs were the thing on the internet, there were a lot of us on the conservative side of journalism who were really excited about that because it gave us, we thought, an independent platform to talk to the public, independent of liberal editors with the Washington Post and the New York Times and so forth. And that was the case for a long time. And it did indeed put tremendous pressure on the established media outlets. Unfortunately, the Washington Post is now owned by, Jeff Bezos of Amazon. I love Amazon for delivering books. I've probably kept them halfway in business with all the books that I've bought over the years. But they own the Washington Post. And when Bezos took over, it very clearly was reflected in the newsroom. That previous ethic that you mentioned, Orlando, of keeping your personal opinions to yourself and reporting both sides, or at least trying to, that went out the window. And it has been replaced by journalists who assume, and the way they report, the way they frame stories, the way they produce a narrative about a story reflects a very, very overtly liberal perspective. And it's gotten to the point in the last couple of years that it's not merely a liberal perspective, but it's a perspective that is inspired by critical race theory, that, all white people are racist and all of the structures of American society are racist and therefore corrupt and therefore must be replaced. And that is presented as if it's an indisputable fact. It's not, but that's the way it's presented.
My last question, and I'm going to toss it back over to Andrea. What advice, Mark, do you have for a young person entering a 4-year journalism program at any university? How would you counsel a young person that really wants to be a journalist, that wants to present the who, what, when, where, and why, and not have it tainted by some corporate perspective? What would be your advice to that young person?
Well, the first thing I'd say is quit. Get out of the J school. Right. I didn't go to journalism school. I learned journalism by doing journalism. And very early on in my career at the Washington Times, Wes Pruden, who some of you may know, told me something that really has governed my understanding of journalism since then. He said, get it first, but first get it right. And that's the ethic that has been lost in journalism. And really, I'm not entirely joking when I say, they should quit. You got to have a degree. That's an unfortunate fact. We are a credentialist society. But far more valuable is get involved with a blog, with an internet website, with a website like Texas Latino Conservatives. Learn the trade. Learn how to get the facts. Learn how to know it when somebody is, not telling you all of the story. And practice it and get good at it. And you'll find journalism is a great, great career. You get to ask all kinds of obnoxious questions to people who don't want to answer them.
Mark, I think the biggest challenge because you were saying, quit, but before they quit, they have to go to university. And yes. So the biggest challenge here, it's not only the the corporations that they are going to the left, but also in the universities, they're getting that education. So,
Yeah.
and you need a degree. So what do you do?
Well, there are a number of things that I've been asked this question by young aspiring journalists. You know, I long ago lost count of how many times I've been asked that. The first thing that I tell them actually is, number one, you have to know history. You have to know what happened yesterday in order to have an understanding of what appears to be happening today. And I always recommend one book in particular. Orlando, you may be familiar with it, Modern Times by Paul Johnson, which really provides you with the factual understanding of the modern era since World War II. Who did what and why? Who were the bad guys? Who were the good guys? Very important narrative perspectives. The second thing is there are a number of organizations, mainly here in Washington, D.C., that offer training to aspiring young journalists. Organizations that are not liberal by any means. They've been established by folks like myself, people with conservative understandings of American history and politics, but who are committed to real journalism. Probably the best illustration of that would be Young America's Foundation, which has a tremendous program for young journalists. And there are other groups as well. It is possible to be a journalist, to go to a liberal college. Liberal college is repetitive because pretty much all of them are liberal.
All of them.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yes.
It is possible to do that and yet know how to be a real journalist. And like I said earlier, I really encourage people who think they want to be a journalist to really dig into it because, you know, the Constitution, the First Amendment, our founders were really sharp guys because they put that First Amendment in because they knew government must have an independent accountability operating on it. And the people, and we're the sovereigns, we have to have a news source that we can trust that is independent from government.
Right.
May I, Mark?
Absolutely. Please, Carmen.
The problem is not the professionals. I would say the problems are the corporations to what I call nowadays corporate communism. It's what's happening. The government and this movement to the left is using the corporations and for them to implement all these rules. So it's not the government. We're not enforcing this. It's corporate communism. And what happened is these journalists, they're working. They have to, to feed their families.
Yeah.
And I believe what they're following is orders. And they are, like you say, they're completely forgetting the ethics of what a journalist is. That's what I'm a realtor now, because I will not buy by those rules. I will tell the truth. So how can we overcome this corporate communism?
Well, I'm speaking as a journalist when I say this, and then I'm going to speak as an American citizen. But as a journalist, the way to overcome it is to do the real journalism better and do it so that people outside of our profession know that there are still sources like the Epoch Times where real journalism is practiced on a day-by-day basis. Now, speaking as a citizen, an American citizen, why is anybody surprised that when we get a Facebook and an Amazon and a Google with so much concentrated power, they're like a monopoly. And we have experience with monopolies in America. Mm-hmm. They have to be broken up because if you don't break them up, then government and special interest organized as monopolies, they work together. They scratch each other's back and they leave the rest of us out, that has to be broken up. And I really think there is a serious move in Congress. Whether it will succeed or not, I don't know. But there is a serious move in Congress to apply a real antitrust regulatory regime on the social media giants. And I say that can't happen too soon.
I was gonna and I want in your thoughts on this and also Carmen, because Orlando was talking about that anybody can be a journalist these days with a phone, and I also saw that now they're getting awards. People are getting awards without being journalists. Yeah. So they're getting journalist awards just because they filmed something. And I saw it with the person that filmed George Floyd situation. He got an award.
Right.
So, but also when it comes to conservative thoughts or conservative ideas or conservative point of views or any conservative, the social media it's banning the people, and you got banned. So you were telling me off the air. So tell us your
my YouTube
experience.
Channel got canceled and closed for good. And what happened is I do my podcast in Instagram and I go live at the same time in my YouTube channel. And in April, they sent me the first warning, and I'm like, okay. Then they sent me the second warning. I decided I'm not doing the podcast live anymore in the YouTube channel. Just going to upload my interviews and things like that. So I let it alone. I kept on doing my podcast in Instagram. At the beginning of June, they canceled my channel. They went back to a video from March. I get my 2 strikes in April. And they went back to March and said, oops, we found this, and now we cancel you. And once they cancel you, you cannot even appeal because they close the channel for good.
Oh my God.
Wow. That's
so
crazy.
It's not to mention that I get 24 hours punished. I cannot upload or say anything in Instagram every so often. So what happened is, even though I tell the truth because that's my compromise as a journalist. For me, is tell the truth, but I'm trying to be more soft nowadays because I don't want for them to close my Instagram account because that's what they're doing. They're canceling us, and it said, well, we don't like what they're saying, so we're just going to cancel that, and then it doesn't exist. And that's their objective, to say, well, this opinion doesn't exist anymore. And that's what we're facing as Americans. And that's the big dangers that we need to fight. And I'm telling you, I'm not going to let it go, but I'm worried that I will end up completely canceled.
Yeah, Bobby, your show is online. So tell us your experience and what you've been facing with this show that is conservative.
Well, sure. Yeah, it's a really big problem right now. I mean, my channel has grown 113,000 subscribers, and now it's on Right Side Broadcasting, which has 1.5 million. So it's great to be out there, but you have to almost be mindful of what you're saying. We talk about freedom of speech, we talk about First Amendment, but then we have these issues where if you want to really talk about the election or you want to talk about some other issue, you're afraid YouTube will ban you. And I've gotten a strike in the past too, and they tried to come up with a second one, and I appealed that one, and I said, look, you guys went back in time to a video that you said was good, and now you're saying it's bad. So I don't think that's right. And within about 10 minutes, in my case, they came back and said, yeah, that we messed up. Wow. So that one resolved itself. But what Mark was saying and what we hear. We know the push from the left on the journalism side. We know that. But the big change that we've seen in the last decade is big tech stepping in too. And they won't let the fight be fair. We always have the CBSs and the PBSs being on the left. And then we had the rise of Rush Limbaugh on radio and Fox News. And we have these other outlets here. So let us compete. Let us go head to head for the war of ideas. But then big tech says, you know what? We don't like those ideas. We don't. We're going to push those aside. We're going to block you or ban you or throttle you, and that is what President Trump was talking about today. That's what Mark's been talking about. And Mark, what did you see? If I could ask a question, what did you see is this rise? You got liberal and conservative journalists going at each other, but then when the conservatives are pushed out via big tech, did you see that coming during your experiences along the way that we'd end up where we are now?
Well, just to be very honest, Bobby, and congratulations on your success in attracting such an audience. I think
I
that's a tremendous achievement.
appreciate it.
Um, in 2003, 2005, when the blogs were really becoming significant, we all thought, hey, everybody will have a platform, and the First Amendment really will flower. What we didn't count on is the accumulation of power from Facebook and Amazon and Google, combined with a government regulatory regime that would not, and to this day does not, recognize that you've got a monopoly here, and a monopoly that is, for example, with the Parler situation. Parler was a competitor to Twitter, still is, but Google and Amazon and I think Facebook was involved in it. They basically killed Parler by withdrawing their access to the market, and that's the key. If I have the power to keep you from being in the market, then I have a monopoly. And that's where the government has got to say to Google and Facebook and Amazon and anybody else that comes into that kind of a position, you cannot control who your competitors are going to be. Everybody has to have an equal opportunity to succeed or fail.
Yep,
Mark, I want to ask a question. I'm not afraid of learning someone else's perspective. I don't know if you know, but I came from a communist country, Cuba.
Yes.
I've also lived in Venezuela. Andrea is a Colombian. Carmen Maria is from Venezuela. So we all have the socialism, the Marxist, the communist, way of government that we know is a failed system of government. It works great till you run out of someone else's money. But I can remember back in 1970. 1972, especially during the Watergate era, there was gavel to gavel coverage by a radio network called Pacifica Radio. Now, I don't know if you guys are familiar with it,
I am.
but Pacifica Radio is a very, very left leaning, a lot of their programming is socialist, verging on communism, but I can tell you that they're pretty open about it. And so they lay it out there. And for me, that's very interesting to be able to consume information from the other side. I've always thought Pacifica Radio laid out their Walzenschong, so to speak, their worldview. And I can appreciate that. I can also tell you, coming from a communist country that squelches speech, that squelches the press, that it is a good relief valve to give channels to socialists in this country, to communists in this country. But as long as they do it openly and honestly, I think that's good for the republic. Am I wrong? And do you also believe that sharing both sides from a pure journalistic perspective is a good thing for the society?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely, I do. And Orlando, let me just say, the reason I got interested in politics and ultimately in journalism is because in 1964, when I was a freshman in high school, I happened to be in the watching television one night in October of '64, and this guy named Ronald Reagan came on the TV and gave a speech. We now know it as the speech, which launched his national political career. And one of the things that he said that night that has stuck with me ever since then, he talked about a Cuban refugee, just like yourself, Orlando, who escaped Cuba, got to Florida, and he was talking to two American businessmen about the things that he had experienced back in Cuba, the terrible things. And one of the American businessmen looked at the other one and said, "How lucky we are," or "How lucky you are," speaking to the Cuban. And the Cuban responded back to them, "How lucky I am. I had some place to escape to." We don't. This is it. This is the last stand for individual freedom, and that's serious. That's a real challenge for all of us. And Orlando,
Yeah.
thank goodness that you made it here to America, and Carmen and Andrea. You know, this is still the land of the free and the home of the brave.
The best country in the
Yeah,
world.
absolutely.
I cannot thank enough that I had the opportunity to come to this country that I love so much as I love my country, but I love the fact that I'm able to not only live in this country, but raise my kids in this country. And they were born here and they love this country, and they will say, we were been having this conversation for the last 2 years, and now they're 16 and they're like, more aware of what the situation and what is going on. And they were like, Mommy, we are so grateful that you came to this country and we were born here.
But now we have to fight for this country
Yes.
because
Yeah,
we are under
absolutely.
attack.
Right.
And I always say this is checkmate, exactly because there is no other place to go. And I always say I come from the future, is because I see the same pattern of what happened in Venezuela repeating in
Yes.
United States. And when we come with this experience, it's easier for us to recognize that from Americans that have not had that experience before. And like I said, I'm here, my children were born here. I'm a proud American. I always say I carry my two flags, but this is our time to fight for this country.
Right, absolutely. I mean, this final fight for freedom is going to be on our shores.
Yes.
I mean, we lead the world in so many different ways, economically, militarily, but also morally, and with a system of government that respects freedoms. And if it crumbles in America, it's going to crumble worldwide.
Yes.
So this is the final stand we have to fight.
But you
I want to,
guys,
and let me just jump in real quick.
Sure.
Go ahead, Mark.
You
Go ahead.
guys have an advantage that I don't have. You're in the best part of America. You're in Texas.
Yes.
That's right.
Yes.
That's right.
Right, Texas.
Look, real quick, and Carmen mentioned this, and it made me think about this. But I'm probably a little older than most folks in the room, but I can tell you, I tell people all the time, we've seen this movie before. Most recently, I'll give you an example. Elections in Venezuela, no question that they're rigged, right? And what we see in this country now is a fight. As you know, most state legislatures are amending their election codes to better define certain aspects of the election code. In other words, you can't take a ballot, 400 feet away. You can't harvest ballots. You can't vote for someone else. I mean, these are not voter suppression, as the left-wing media calls it. These are basically shoring up definitions. Anybody can vote. But the point is that in Latin American countries, elections are rigged. End of story. Let me just say that. The other observation I'll make, Mark and Bobby, you all have seen this before. In Venezuela, for example, you got Hugo Chavez who gets elected. They start tinkering with the Constitution. They start tinkering with the Supreme Court. Mexico is dealing with this right now. As you know, Mexico has a leftist president, so they're tinkering with the Supreme Court so that both the legislative and the judiciary are basically in cahoots supporting the executive. And our system was clearly designed to have checks and balances, that each one would operate independently. And so it's frightening to see in this country. I know that procedurally we're trying to do away with the filibuster, and that happens from time to time. I'm not that worried about it because it's a rule inside the Senate. I'm okay with that. But I am most concerned about the fact that they call our attempts, meaning good American citizens that want honest elections. We're trying to clean up the language in the election code. They call it voter suppression to hoodwink the public. But more disturbing, Mark and Bobby, is the fact that this current administration literally tried to pack the Supreme Court just like they do in Venezuela and now in Mexico.
Yes.
And what I don't understand is, well, I do understand it. We no longer have a system of education in this country where we educate kids on the history, the Western principles, the Western philosophy that created a constitution that came from the Magna Carta. Hell, nobody knows what the Magna Carta is. Nobody understands Western philosophy from the perspective of government and governing. And so kids don't know that socialist countries do tinker with their constitution, do tinker with their elections, do tinker with their Supreme Courts so that they get the outcomes they want. That
Yep.
to me, along with a rotten media, is dangerous to the country.
Yeah, absolutely. If I could join in on that, just it's one comment about the courts, and for people watching at home, all you need to do is watch one of these Supreme Court confirmation hearings to know that what the left is and what their agenda is. Because Orlando talked about separation of powers, and the legislative should do something, the judiciary should do something. Yet every Democrat, what they will ask the nominee is, how do you feel about this issue? Do you support this issue? When we know that shouldn't matter. If you are following the Constitution, then whether you're a pro-life or pro-abortion shouldn't matter. It's whether this law you passed to protect the innocent human life is constitutional or not. But they don't want justices. They don't want judges. They want legislators. And so that's why they ask, how do you feel about this issue? Right there, they reveal their agenda. Plain and simple, they want more legislators. They just happen to call them Supreme Court justices.
I would like to add to what Orlando said about voting rights. He said the other thing that we should not do is to have assistant voting machines that have a program called Smartmatics that was created in Venezuela so Hugo Chavez, the communist dictator, could stay in power forever. And that's the reality of what's happening with Dominion. Dominion, the program, the software was created in Venezuela. How come in this country we're running our elections with that?
Right.
And then, of course, first thing they do, what Hugo Chavez did, got into power, changed the constitution. And with that, because we used to have separation of power, he changed the constitution and that way became one assembly instead of Senate, Congress, then changed, the Supreme Court, and here we are. And that's what I say. I come from the future. Oh my God,
Yeah.
I want to get off of this train.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
If I could just add a historical footnote to what Orlando just said. Years ago, let's say 20 years ago, when I was interviewing a young journalist who wanted to be hired, one of the first questions I always asked them was, what is the significance of the year 1066? And more often than not, back then, they would respond accurately. In the last 10 years, when I've asked, what is the significance of the year 1066, I get this look like, what are you talking about? Well, as Orlando said, we used to teach history. And when we taught history, people generally knew that 1066 was the year that William the Conqueror conquered England. And what that did is it introduced from the European continent the Justinian Code of Law, which has an absolute king authority, which the England that he conquered was a very decentralized system, and the kings were not very powerful. But it was that streak of authoritarianism that led to George III that we in America rebelled against. So 1066 is a part of American history, and people who are covering it in America should know that.
Yeah, and now I'm going to tell you what an old fossil I am, but this whole idea of who controls the message is about as long as humanity. I know that everybody in the room and everybody watching has read Plato's Republic from around, I guess, 600 BC. But even Plato talked about the importance of the message, and this is what's most frightening to me is that not only is the left controlling the message, or we get a lopsided message, but that we don't have an educational background upon which to judge these messages.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So that's why we're seeing the young people embracing these crazy ideas that, if they taught history, lately I've been reading how horrible the frontiersmen were to the Comanche in the High Plains. Well, anyone that has read history, uh, the Comanche were pretty vicious people. If you know what they did to the frontiersmen and the wagon trains and the occupants and the children and the women, my God, that would make waterboarding seem like a walk in the park. So if we don't have a historical background, we just consume this garbage that's being put out by the left, and this is what's most disturbing as an immigrant that has taken an interest and has a passion and a love for this country, that we're actually seeing it crumble before our very eyes.
Amen to that.
Mark,
But
I know you have to leave early before we end the show. So I don't know if you still have time or you're running out of time.
Well, I'll tell you, I'm enjoying this conversation so much.
Yeah, it's
I'm gonna
good,
stick
isn't it?
around as long as you'll keep me here.
Oh,
Great.
great.
Very nice.
Okay. We'll love to have you the whole show. I was just saying that because I know you were saying that probably you need to leave earlier. I wanna talk about the regulations in the media. Like, I remember back in our time when you were an anchor of Telemundo and I was an anchor in Univision. I remember that it was always you were hearing from the producers and the news director, FCC, you have to have a balance in the politics. And I remember covering Orlando's race, and if we cover this equal time in the Republican Party, we need to cover also in the Democratic Party. I don't see that anymore.
Oh, no.
So what happened with the regulations in the media?
Well, the leftists are ruling, so no more regulations. They dictate their own regulations. That's what's really happening, is my take.
What is your
Let
thoughts,
me
Mark?
jump in. Hang on real quick before Mark comments, because I know he wanted to comment. This is how bad it is. And, I'm a keen observer of, I don't watch local news anymore because, I mean, how many car wrecks and especially in Houston, how many weekend shootings that can you have? That they, by the way, now they label gun violence. Mark, I don't know what it's like up in the Washington, D.C. area, but, the liberals took over the criminal court system here in Harris County, which is Houston, Texas. And they've pretty much abolished the bail bond system. And so, for example, right now, there are over 2,800 handguns stolen out of parking lots, people's vehicles. And the penalty for that, of course, when you go to court, is that your bond is set at $100, a $100 bond, which is paid by the local taxpayers here in Harris County. And we're wondering why we have gun violence. The whole movement is to take away the firearms of the law-abiding citizen, but yet on this end, we have a turnstile system over here that's feeding the underground criminal world. People know they can go to parking lots, steal a Houstonian, a Texan's handgun, sell it, and there be no penal code consequence for doing that. It's absolutely ridiculous.
Orlando, it just amazes me. My father gave me my first firearm when I was 11 years old. It was a 22 made by a company in Connecticut called a New Haven. And I was so proud of that. And I learned at a very early age that you have to be responsible in using a firearm. And today we have all of these pistols that somehow or another, I don't know how they do it. They don't have legs, they don't have eyes, but somehow all these pistols end up shooting human beings. Mm-hmm. How does that happen? I thought a pistol had to be held by somebody who pulled the trigger after aiming it at somebody.
I agree. I say that all the time. Gun violence.
A
Yeah, I've never seen a gun discharge on its own and, fatally wound somebody.
Yeah.
Right. You got these rogue guns just out there walking around looking for victims. Yeah. I mean, that's what the left wants you to believe. that it's the gun
Exactly.
violence. They're going after the gun because the gun is the bad guy. It has become the bad guy. And as Orlando said, you have law-abiding citizens going about their business, and what this really affects is them, their ability to protect themselves. The Second Amendment is not about hunting or fishing or shooting targets. It's about arming yourselves against a tyrannical government and being
Exactly.
able to defend yourself. And we saw that in Venezuela.
We saw
When
it.
they came, and the left likes to roll their eyes and think this stuff doesn't happen, and you had the richest country in South
Oh
America
my God, yeah.
become the poorest, and the
Still
less able
richer
to
the
defend.
ground.
Right.
Like I always say, we still rich on the ground. How come our people are starving? How come our people are looking for food in the trash can? And just like Orlando said and Mark said, I grew up with guns. My father had guns, but he also taught us the responsibility of having guns. But what was the first thing Hugo Chavez did as soon as he came into power? Regulate the guns. And regulations got to a point that, okay, now we need to regulate ammunitions. And so you can get guns, you can get ammunitions, but who got the guns?
Right.
The criminals.
Right.
So it's really against us, law abiding citizens, and pro criminals. That's the reality behind that. Because only this week, by the way, in Venezuela, they freed pretty much a whole jail in one of our states.
Oh my God.
Are we hearing that also here in United States?
Yeah.
Right.
So like I say, it's the manual. And they're following the manual. And then what's going to happen with all these criminals on the streets in Venezuela with people without guns? Crime is going to keep on going up, which is already a
It's
main
already
issue.
happening.
Yeah.
It's already
Yeah,
a
it's
main
terrible.
issue. Yeah.
It's already happening
Let
in
me jump
Houston and
back
Harris
in
County.
here real quick. Let me jump back in here real quick because, Mark, we don't want to be, gloom and doom and not offer any potential solutions. I'm invited to speak across the state of Texas often. And um, one of the things that we have so many challenges, Mark, with respect to education, which I now call indoctrination. We have some challenges, and sometimes, we have a saying in Texas. We can say it one of two ways. We say that I'm the burr in the saddle, or sometimes I say I'm the turd in the punch bowl. But anyway, uh, the infiltration of the left side into our college campuses. I am always amazed how conservative states whose governors appoint the Board of Regents to publicly subsidized university institutions of higher learning allow the Board of Regents and the management and the professor and the unions in those schools to allow the left-leaning voice, but to squelch the right. I still haven't figured out why a governor doesn't call those universities and say, I was reviewing your budget and I'm going to recommend that the legislature, have a heart to heart conversation, because what they're doing is they're blocking the conservative voice on campus. They're allowing the left uh, voice on campus. And so I think that the governors ought to hold these members of the Board of Regents accountable. Now, one of the things that I tell taxpayers and interested citizens across the state of Texas when I go talk to them is that the best thing they can do is write a letter to the governor and their senator and say, as taxpayers, we're not putting up with this anymore. We want both sides to be heard on the college campus, because this is our tuition money. This is our tax dollars that we're sending our children to your institutions to get an education, not an indoctrination. And, not only are we fighting the universities, we're fighting the editorial boardroom, we're fighting the producers, we're fighting the social media platforms. We have a multi-front battle going on. But one of the best ways I think that our viewers and taxpayers can get involved is to pen a letter or send an email to your elected official saying, we're not putting up with this lopsided Board of Regents that you're appointing. Is that an appropriate message to deliver to taxpayers in America, Mark?
Oh, absolutely. And what you're pointing to, Orlando, is one of the basic reasons why I'm very optimistic about what's going to be happening in this country in the near future, because our system has built into it the ability of citizens to exercise the fact that they are the sovereign, and they can hold our congressmen, for example, accountable, and our governors accountable, and our presidents, should I whisper that, Mr. Biden, to do what we choose them to do, not what they choose to do. I think that's absolutely the case. And I have to go back to Reagan in 1964. You and I have a rendezvous with destiny. Mm-hmm. We can preserve for our children and our grandchildren this, the last best hope of freedom on earth. Yes. Or.
Yeah, that's right.
We have a question.
Okay, my last comment, and then I'm gonna let the crew at the studio jump in. And I think we touched on this earlier, and Bobby, I'd like your opinion too. Mark, mm-hmm. you can sound off on this, but one of the things that is most disturbing to me, it has nothing to do with journalism, is the laziness of the legislative branch of our government. Our legislative branch, our Congress, for example, let me give you an example of an issue that's very important to us here in Texas: immigration. Right. I say to everybody that's viewing or when I go talk, if you think that the immigration problem is a problem that started when Donald Trump or Obama was elected, let me tell you, you haven't been paying attention. Right. Illegal immigration has been a problem in this country for almost half a century. And yet, here we are today, Congress will not address the immigration laws in this country, either to streamline it or to fortify the border, or to appropriate additional resources to states that are being drowned like Texas, because our local taxpayers are absorbing the cost of the social services that we're providing the undocumented alien, both healthcare, because now it's mandatory that we educate their children. And so, you know, they drive without driver's licenses. So we as taxpayers are absorbing the cost. Right. And Congress will not amend the laws. And here, to jump a little bit onto conservatives, I watched with amazement, Mark, as we knew that the healthcare system in this country was a train wreck about to happen. Millions of Americans were having to sell the farm, their house, mortgage themselves up to be able to pay for medical treatment. And, you know, the Republicans let the Democrats come up with almost a one-payer system. But, you know, the point is, Congress is happy letting the Supreme Court legislate, which I'm sure they'll do happily, more so before than now, then pass laws and actually roll up their sleeves and address the issues. Do you see that in Washington? Is our Congress becoming more focused on re-election rather than solving our problems, is the question.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what they've been obsessed with for many, many years. That's what most congressmen in both parties spend most of their time doing, is either raising funds for their re-election campaign or making the kind of deals that they think they need to make in order to garner support for their next election.
And if I can join in, yep.
Go ahead, Bobby.
Oh yeah, I just wanted to jump in on that with Orlando and what you said, Mark, is that we see, I think this is one of the big things that happened with the public reaction when Donald Trump got elected president, because he came in as this guy that was going to bust heads on the media and on the deep state, and people were excited about that. But two legislative things that are just mind-blowing, and Orlando mentioned them: immigration reform and healthcare reform. Mm-hmm. How many times did the legislature push a repeal of Obamacare when Obama was president? Numerous times. And it turned out the reason they did it is because they knew Obama would veto it. And they kept saying, give us a Republican president and we're going to get it done. Well, now you come up with a Republican president who says, you know what? I want to get that done. He comes in and they don't do it. It was a slap in the face of the American public who never liked Obamacare. It never pulled favorably at all. Same thing with immigration reform. Trump said he's going to build a wall. He's going to enact these policies. He was fought by Paul Ryan in the Congress. It was a big wake-up call to Americans that they need to speak out. And also, Mark, what you and Orlando mentioned about people speaking up, it's not an option. It's the only recourse we have left. It ultimately comes down to us. And what we see in places like Loudoun County and other places that are speaking out on critical race theory, or even in Texas with the university system, a number of people spoke out when the University of Texas was going to drop the eyes of Texas and this wokeness is running out of control. They spoke out, they stepped up, and change is made. If we don't speak up, we're doomed, because that's the last wall of protection.
Absolutely. Look, and we're almost out of time, and I want to thank everybody for the generosity of their time. Mark, Bobby, Carmen, Maria, really wonderful to have all you guys. But let me make a comment. Everybody knows, as long as I've been in politics, I'm a conservative first, and there's only two teams to play for. You either pick the red team or you pick the blue team, and I've chosen the red team. And but I can tell you that my team isn't perfect, just like no NFL team is perfect. And I tell people all the time that Donald Trump was a result of the failures of the Republican Party. That's why we got somebody like Donald Trump, and people are fed up. Republicans, who tend to be conservative, were fed up with what Bobby was talking about. All these promises. Oh no, elect me this time. Give me the House. Give me the Senate. Give me the executive. We'll put in we heard that too many times, and that's why we end up with Donald Trump. So my message is, let's get back to conservatism. And, frankly, I hope the Republicans can get back to a limited government, a conservative type of government where they value the sovereignty and the individual, knowing that our rights don't come from Washington, D.C., but they come from our Creator. And so that's my message for the day. Mark, I don't expect you to agree, but you can jump in.
Oh, no, I absolutely agree. I wrote a column in May of 2006 saying if Republicans keep talking about limiting government without walking that talk, they'll be thrown out of government. And that November, they were.
Excellent program, guys. Thank you so much.
Your message, the last message before we go off the air, because we're running out of time. Message, and also how people can find your channel.
Oh, well, I want to echo what people said, and that is to speak out, to get active, to do your part, because you can look at your senators, you can look at your president, but ultimately it's local. It's what you're doing in your community to make a difference. If you want to find out about my show, just search on Bobby Eberle on YouTube. It's the 13-minute news hour, or go to Right Side Broadcasting. The show's Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 8 p.m. Central Time. And hope to see you on the show.
Great. Carmen Maria.
And don't forget to follow Mark Tapscott at Epoch Times. Mark, thank you. Bobby, thank you.
I'll be doing that.
Bid everybody a farewell.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thanks for having me once again. And I hope, like Eberle said, we need to get involved. People is allergic to politics, but if we don't get involved in politics is going to rule us, as we have seen in this last year especially. So you can find me in Facebook, Carmen Maria Montiel Avila, with the long name. Carmen M.A. Montiel in Twitter, Instagram, Carmen Maria Montiel.
Not anymore in YouTube.
I have another one, is Carmen Maria Today. We're all not going to be silent. So look for Carmen Maria Today. You'll find me everywhere, and more news to come eventually.
Nice.
More
Very
news,
good.
exactly,
Yeah,
because
breaking right here.
Yeah, we're looking for your candidates as a Congress for 2022, no?
Exactly, for 2022, especially because what do representatives do when they get to Congress? Spend, and Mark can say that probably, too, half of the day is spent raising money for my next election. And that's why they don't get anything done. So we need to scratch that out of the books and get our representatives and our senators to work.
Excellent. And follow us also on social media in Texas Latino Conservatives, and also visit our webpage, texaslatinoconservatives.com, and join this big family. Just become a member. It's only $35 a year. So become a member and help us to send the conservative message. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, Bobby,
Sure thing.
for your time.
Enjoyed it.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Carmen Maria. Thank you, Mark. And thank you, Orlando, also for joining us from Montana. See you guys next Wednesday. Ciao, ciao.